Let's have a quick international news review before we speak to our guest this morning. Let's start with The Guardian. And it's spoken to two spiritual leaders of Al-Qaeda. They say their terror group is being ripped apart because it's warring with the Islamic State group. The paper reports that the US is struggling to keep up with the shifts in the global jihadist movement.
The Wall Street Journal carries a photo of Pope Francis. He's ordered the creation of a tribunal at the Vatican to deal with bishops who cover up or fail to prevent child sex abuse.
The Financial Times reports that the UK's finance minister is to start selling off the state's £32 billion stake in the Royal Bank of Scotland. It will be Britain's biggest ever privatisation, but it will be sold at a big loss.
As South Korea rushes to contain the potentially deadly MERS outbreak, the Straits Times looks at the economic fallout. President Park Geun-hye has delayed a trip to the United States, which included a meeting with President Obama.
After 5 years of negotiations, African leaders have signed a 26-nation free trade agreement. Gulf News, business section of the paper, reporting that the deal creates a framework to ease the movement of goods in an area which is home to 625 million people.
And a few peanuts a day can help cut the risk of dying early, according to a study in The Times. Salted peanuts and peanut butter, however, don't count. Which is a shame, because I love peanut butter.
I love peanut butter. Mark Davies is here, Chief Executive at the Strategy Consultancy, Camberton. Good morning,
Mark. Nice to see you.
So many of the jihadist groups around the world, Boko Haram or whoever you care to mention, they're probably the most significant in Africa. There are others in North Africa. They've been slowly debating whether they should pledge their allegiance, move it from Al-Qaeda to Islamic State, and many of them are doing that. This is amazing that these two global terror groups are actually talking openly, at least Al-Qaeda is, to Western newspapers about their philosophies and how they disagree with other global jihadist groups.
Well, it is. I mean, how do you differentiate between two sets of bad people, really? You want everybody who's involved in any of these debates to be losing ground, and the reality is that they have gained ground, and ISIS obviously have gained a lot of ground over the course of recent years. They split from Al-Qaeda in 2014 because they were even more extreme than Al-Qaeda. When you think that it was Al-Qaeda that, as far as most people are concerned, started this with the attacks in 2001. Obviously, there were plenty of things happening before then, but it really burst into public consciousness around then. They killed 3,000 people plus, and now they're talking about others being worse than they are. It's a pretty terrifying world that we're living in when you're in that situation. But as I say, really, we want everybody in this area to lose. We don't want Al-Qaeda to say, look, we're not quite as bad as they are, so back us. We want them all to be, well, not to exist.
Most of the coverage in the Western media is about how to defeat IS. But slowly, I'm at least beginning to notice more articles which are looking at the possibility of Islamic State winning or never being defeated.
Yeah, interestingly, and this is the Guardian's take, the Times' take today is that we get closer to the US having to put boots on the ground. And this is just days after President Obama said, we don't have a strategy for these people yet. This has been going on for quite a long time now. So for the United States to say we don't have a strategy is astonishing. Don't forget that when they got to Palmyra last month, they had to cross the desert and nobody bombed them in the time that they did that. And I think that's extraordinary. I haven't yet found anybody who can tell me why we didn't take action at that point.
Right, let's move on to another story. Front page of the Wall Street Journal, a picture of Pope Francis, who was waving to an audience at St. Peter's Square yesterday, and this talks about the fact that he's made a decision to basically make sure that those who have allowed sexual abuse to go on and have turned a blind eye, what have you, within his religion, bishops, for example, are no longer able to get away with that.
Yeah, this is an extra step, looking at the bishops who have protected those priests over the years. Of course, Pope Francis has done more in this area than any of his predecessors have, and this is another fairly significant step, I think. The Wall Street Journal, interestingly, doesn't go into it in any greater depth than it does on the front page here. They've got the photo of him, they mention it in the caption, but it doesn't talk about it in great detail. It will be welcomed, of course.
Yeah, it's interesting. He really has taken it so much further than John Paul II, than the previous Pope Ratzinger, who stepped down, of course. I listened to a radio interview with a former American ambassador to the Vatican who said that bishops around the world, that they feel as if they're separate from the Curia, which is the sort of legislative body of the Vatican, and that this will finally make them pay attention. This guy is more a protector of the Catholic poor and unprotected than any pope that I've ever personally had experience with.
Well, in our lifetime, I don't think there's any question about that. And if it's true in our lifetime, it's almost certainly true historically.
Now, let's have a look at the Financial Times front page. George Osborne with Mark Carney behind him in their evening dress. This is the Mansion House speech, which is an annual event that takes place in our country for international viewers. They probably think, what the heck is all the fuss about? But it's quite a big deal, isn't it, for the City of London. It sort of lays out policy that will affect the economy and business.
Yeah, the Mansion House is the official residence of the Lord Mayor, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer goes every year and he makes a speech and he says what's going to happen, and the Governor of the Bank of England makes a speech as well. It's interesting that all the papers have led with Osborne's line. Personally, I think that Carney's line, which is that we are in a new era for bankers and that the world that they lived in is no longer the world where they dominate, I think is more interesting. But understandably, all the editors have gone for George Osborne's line, which is that he's going to return Royal Bank of Scotland from state ownership to the private sector. And the reason they're all interested in that is because he's going to have to do so at a price where the government will make a significant loss on the investment that they made.
Reading the article, you get the impression he was nudged to a degree by Mark Carney, Governor of the Bank of England, on this issue, saying the timing is right despite the loss politically and also financially.
Well, he says himself that politically this is not easy, but it's the right thing to do. He's going to make a £7 billion loss on the money that the Labour government put in 2008. Interestingly, he also had the Treasury publish a report yesterday by Rothschilds, which said that overall the government will have made a profit. People will argue about the numbers. I think that the political line here is by far the more important one, which is the government trying to draw a line under the crisis and say, we're moving forward now.
Okay, let's skip over the Straits Times story about it's significant in business terms. 1.5% now is the interest rate, which has been cut because of economic concerns around the MERS virus, which is affecting the country. Because in the Gulf News business section, it's about time Africa had some sort of free trade deal, and it's finally arrived.
Well, it's got 3 different free trade deals. It's putting them together. So this is about taking 26 countries in Africa and creating a free trade area from Cairo all the way down to Cape Town. And of course, the hope is from analysts that this will finally see Africa emerge. The reality is that Africa only accounts for 2% of global trade. How much difference this makes remains to be seen, because the growth rates in Africa are still not that dramatic, given that it has been emerging, or people have talked about it potentially emerging now for really some time, and yet they're still only showing growth rates of around 5% year on year.
Within the 26 countries itself, it's the ease of trade, the movement of people, movement of goods, all that kind of thing. I mean, that will make a difference to their economies. Maybe not necessarily on an international stage, but to those countries it will make a difference, won't it?
It will, but they will have exactly the same issues that 28 countries in Europe have had, which is that when you try and put together an economic situation, you have political issues.
Finally, in the Times, let's start eating peanuts, but not salted peanuts, and not spoonfuls of peanut butter.
And more to the point, you have to be very, very accurate about how many peanuts you eat. Because if you eat between 5 and 10 grams, then you don't live for as long as if you eat more than 10 grams. But if you eat less than 5 grams, then you live for a shorter amount of time as well. So you have to be very accurate. I mean, it seems to me absurd that you can talk about a 23% lower chance of dying if you eat this many grams, 26% if you eat a few less, 12% if you eat a few more.
Add a glass of red wine to that and an aspirin, and hey, you're sorted.
I think a few people.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Nice
Mark.
to see you. Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.